Hi everybody, welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is Read Aloud Time with Miss Johnson, where I'm reading aloud from our chapter book, A Series of Unfortunate Events, The Bad Beginning. This is by Lemony Snicket. We are on chapter 11. So last where we left off, Violet was trying to rescue Sunny from the tower, and she climbed all the way up to the top and was met with the hook-handed man. So we're going to find out what happens after that. Let's go. This is chapter 11. Chapter 11. How pleasant that you could join us, the hook-handed man said in a sickly sweet voice. Violet immediately tried to scurry back down the rope, but Count Olaf's assistance was too quick for her. In one movement, he hoisted her into the tower room and, with a flick of his hook, sent her rescue device clanging to the ground. Now Violet was trapped as her sister. I'm so glad you're here, the hook-handed man said. I was just thinking how much I wanted to see your pretty face. Have a seat. What are you going to do with me? Violet asked. I said, have a seat, the hook-handed man snarled and pushed her into the chair. Violet looked around the dim and messy room. I am certain that over the course of your own life, you have noticed that people's rooms reflect their personalities. In my room, for instance, I have gathered a collection of objects that are important to me, including a dusty accordion on which I play a few sad songs, a large bundle of notes on the activities of the Baudelaire orphans, and a blurry photograph taken a very long time ago of a woman whose name is Beatrice. These are items that are very precious and dear to me. The tower room held objects that were very dear and precious to Count Olaf, and they were terrible things. There were scraps of paper in which he had written his evil ideas in an illegible scrawl, lying in a messy piles on top of the copy of Nuptial Law he had taken from Klaus. There was a few chairs and a handful of candles which were giving off flickering shadows. Littered all over the floor was empty wine bottles and dirty dishes. But most of all, there were drawings and paintings and carvings of eyes, big and small, all over the room. There were eyes painted on the ceiling and scratched into the grimy wooden floors. There were eyes scrawled along the windowsill, and one big eye painted the knob of the door that led to the stairs. It was a terrible place. The hook-handed man reached into a pocket of his greasy overcoat and pulled out a walkie-talkie. With some difficulty, he pressed a button and waited a moment. Boss, it's me, he said. Your blushing bride just climbed up here to try and rescue the biting brat. He paused as Count Olaf said something. I don't know, with some sort of rope. It was a grappling hook, Violet said, and tore off a sleeve of her nightgown to make a bandage for her shoulder. I made it myself. She says it was a grappling hook, the hook-handed man said into the walkie-talkie. I don't know, boss. Yes, boss. Yes, boss. Of course, I understand it. She's yours. Yes, boss. He pressed a button to disconnect the line and then turned to face Violet. Count Olaf is very displeased with his bride. I'm not his bride, Violet said bitterly. Very soon you will be, the hook-handed man said, wagging his hook the way most people would wag a finger. In the meantime, however, I have to go and fetch your brother. The three of you will be locked in this room until night falls. That way Count Olaf can be sure that you will stay out of mischief. With that, the hook-handed man stomped out of the room. Violet heard the door lock and behind him, and then listened to his footsteps fading away down the stairs. She immediately went over to Sunny and put a hand on the little head, afraid to untie or unscrape her sister from fear of incurring, a word which here means bringing about, Count Olaf's wrath. Violet stroked Sunny's hair and murmured that everything was all right. But of course, everything was not all right. Everything was all wrong, and as the first light of morning trickled into the tower room, Violet reflected all the awful things that her and her siblings experienced recently. Their parents had died suddenly and horribly. Mr. Poe had bought them ugly clothing. They had moved in Count Olaf's house and were treated horribly. Mr. Poe had refused to help them. They had discovered a fiendish plot involving marrying Violet and stealing the Baudelaire fortune. Klaus had tried to confront Olaf with knowledge he'd learned in the Strauss's library and failed. Poor Sunny had been captured, and now Violet had tried to rescue Sunny and found herself captured as well. All in all, the Baudelaire orphans had encountered catastrophe after catastrophe, and Violet found their situation lamentably deplorable, a phrase which here means it was not at all enjoyable. The sound of the footsteps coming up the stairs brought Violet out of her thoughts, and soon the hook-handed man opened the door and thrust in a very tired, confused and scared Klaus into the room. "Here's the last orphan," the hook-handed man said, "and now I must go help Count Olaf with final preparations for tonight's performance. No monkey business, you two, or I will have to tie you up and let you dangle out of the window as well." Glaring at them, he looked at the door again and tromped downstairs. Klaus blinked and looked around the filthy room. He was still in his pajamas. "Why had this happen?" he asked. "What has happened?" he asked Violet. "Why are we up here?" "I tried to rescue Sunny," Violet said, using an invention of mine to climb up the tower. Klaus went over to the window and looked down at the ground. "It's so high up," he said. "You must have been terrified." "It was very scary," she admitted, "but not as scary as the thought of marrying Count Olaf." "I'm sorry your invention didn't work," Klaus said sadly. "The invention worked fine," Violet said, rubbing her sore shoulder. "I just got caught, and now we're doomed. The hook-handed man said they'd keep us here until night, and then it's the marvelous marriage." "Do you think you could invent something that would help us escape?" Klaus asked, looking around the room. "Maybe," Violet said. "And why don't you go through these books and papers? Perhaps there's some information we can use." For the next few hours, Violet and Klaus searched the room and their own minds for anything that might help them. Violet looked for objects for which she could invent something. Klaus read through Count Olaf's papers and books. From time to time, they would go over to Sunny and smile at her and pat her head to reassure her. Occasionally, Violet and Klaus would speak to each other, but mostly they were silent and lost in their own thoughts. "If we had any kerosene," Violet said, "around noon, I could make a Molotov cocktail with these bottles." "What are Molotov cocktails?" Klaus asked. "They're small bombs made inside bottles," Violet explained. "We can throw them out the window and attract the attention of passers-by." "But we don't have any kerosene," Klaus said mournfully. They were silent for several hours. "If we were polygamists," Klaus said, "Count Olaf's marriage wouldn't work." "What are polygamists?" Violet said. "Polygamists are people who marry more than one person," Klaus explained. "In this community, polygamists are breaking the law, even if they have married in the presence of the judge with the statement of 'I do' and the signed document of their land. I read it here in nuptial law." "But we're not polygamists," Violet said mournfully. They were silent for several more hours. "We could break these bottles in half," Violet said, "and use them as knives, but I'm afraid that Count Olaf's troop would overpower us." "You could say 'I don't' instead of 'I do,'" Klaus said, "but I'm afraid Count Olaf would order Sunny dropped off the tower." "I certainly would," Count Olaf said, and the children jumped. They had been so involved in their conversation that they hadn't heard him come into the stairs and open the door. She was wearing a fancy suit, and his eyebrow had been waxed, so it looked as shiny as his eyes. Behind him stood the hook-handed man, who smiled and waved a hook at the youngsters. "Come, orphans," Olaf said. "It is time for the big event. My associate here will stay behind in the room and will keep in constant contact through the walkie-talkies. If anything goes wrong during tonight's performance, your sister will be dropped to her death. Come along now." Violet and Klaus looked at each other and then at Sunny, still dangling in her cage, and followed Count Olaf out the door. As Klaus walked to the tower stairs, he felt a heavy sinking in his heart as all hope left him. There truly seemed to be no way out of their predicament. Violet was feeling the same way until she reached out with her right hand to grasp the banister for balance. She looked at her right hand for a second and began to think. All the way down the stairs and out the door, and the short walk down the block to the theater, Violet thought and thought and thought, harder than she had in her entire life. Alright, so that was chapter 11 right now. So Violet is thinking of something. I wonder if she's going to come in and save the day with an amazing idea. Let's find out next time. Thank you for watching my video. Comment and let me know if you like it. See you later. Bye.